So much structure of our national life is built around the school structure. That is a quote from the Labor Secretary yesterday speaking at the Department of Education. My question for you today is, should it be that way? Let's get caught up on what happened yesterday at the Department of Education with a briefing from the White House Task Force on COVID-19 related to the school year. And then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what happened in the Supreme Court with two decisions regarding the president's finances that you should know about. But I like to start with what could have the potential largest consequence in your life first, and that is what we heard about the school year ahead, whether or not you have children. The Labor Secretary was making the argument, this is why the school structure matters. It matters for the way businesses operate, and it matters for the way that we operate as Americans. Again, should it be that way? Should we still be wedded to the schedule that we have followed over the last several years in this new I don't want to say error, but this new place that we're in history regarding the pandemic. So we're going to tackle that, but I want to fill you in on something that Deborah Birx said yesterday that isn't getting a lot of attention, that actually I think is a really, really big story. So Dr. Deborah Birx was giving a little bit of a presentation about what was happening with COVID-19 around America, and she was focusing on a couple key states, Florida, Texas, Arizona, and California. And she was making some argument to say that although we're seeing an increase of cases, there's some early indications that these increases could be stabilizing, although she wasn't sure because we were coming off the July 4th holiday. So I'm going to paraphrase a little bit about what she said. She said, what we saw in the Northeast with New York, for example, is you would see a peak and a valley. You would see a peak and a valley. And then different cities would follow the pattern. So let's say New York peaks first and starts going down. Boston would then peak and go down. Philadelphia peaks and goes down. You get the picture. So you kind of see this graphic that looks like the wave. That's not the case for America's South. She said it was unusual. She said whatever happened in Florida happened across the Sun Belt. Whatever occurred almost across the board in the South at almost the same time. So all of a sudden we saw a spike in infection. So it wasn't like kind of a rolling wave. They don't know why that happened. Could it be Memorial Day holiday? Could it be protests? I know some of you have asked that question, but they don't know why. In all these different states, all these different areas, why all of a sudden did the spike happen almost simultaneously? I think that's something really important to know. The Labor Secretary was talking about what's going on with the employment picture and saying that really when children are at home, it's women that tend to take care of the children. And he was raising some concerns about unemployment for women in America because of the schools having to be virtual in the spring. So the CDC director said, yes, we're putting out some new guidelines, but our guidelines are not to be used as an excuse for keeping kids out of school. So you can see there, the position of the federal government is very clear. They want schools to open. However, you should know that it's not up to the federal government. It's up to your individual school district. It's really important, separation of power. So although there's a lot of headlines about this and something just to watch as far as what's being indicated by the federal government, it's really going to come down to your particular county. And I think that's critical. It's an interesting intersection of history and news today. Today in history, the man who invented the sewing machine was born. Sort of random, right? But I was looking at this story. I don't really know anything about that particular story of the sewing machine, but he developed this sewing machine, showed it to everybody, got a patent for it, and everyone was like, that is so awesome. And then nothing happens. He ends up going to England to try to promote his invention. He comes back home and then everyone has his sewing machine. He ended up having to sue because he had the patent for the sewing machine, and he was able to eventually recover some of the financial loss due to that. But the sewing machine really changed our lives. It changed the way that we manufacture clothes and so many different items. And really it brought women and children into the workforce for the first time. And what else happened? A structured work week. And that work week, as we know, is what we also mimic our school structure out of after. So you see these, it's kind of interesting. We've done this way for about 100 years, 5-day work week, 40 hours a week in the office or at school 5 days a week. The question I think we can ask ourselves during this time is that still working for us? Pandemic or no pandemic? Does that actually make sense? And when you see the largest school district in the nation, New York, saying we're going to be partially opened and do a combination of a few different things, it makes me wonder. It can be a real negative and it can be viewed as a real negative. I think we could have a really interesting conversation about creativity and how creative we can be during this time. to maybe make a different schedule that works better for everybody? Am I too idealistic? Tell me. I don't know. I just think it's worth asking that question. Okay, here's what happened at the Supreme Court today. The Supreme Court had heard two different cases regarding the president's finances. There were two different cases that were asking for access to different finances for different reasons. You should know that this is really the first time in nearly 25 years that the Supreme Court's decisions came into July. They're usually done by now, but because of COVID-19, there was a delay in the court. So there's these requests for President Trump's financial statements, not directly to the president, but to banks or to his accounting firm. And his team is like, no, we don't want you to have access to these different records. The cases, one was out of New York regarding allegations that the president used finances to pay off different women that were alleging affairs with the president. And then the Congress also had an inquiry investigation that was requiring access to the president's finance. So two different cases, very different circumstances. And in both cases, the Supreme Court ruled against the president's team and said, just because he's the president doesn't mean that these requests, these subpoenas for financial statements can't happen. Here's the deal though. A lot of headlines around this story because there's always been questions about the president's finances. Very little immediate consequence. So basically the Supreme Court said, yes, these requests can continue, but they're going to continue in court. You are not going to see the president's financials before the election. You will hear about these cases probably for a while longer. But again, lots of headlines, very little immediate consequence. It is a loss for the President Trump's legal team, but it's not that the fight is over. So we're sort of in the middle of the story still, not near the end, but this was critical by the Supreme Court because they said, no, this can happen. So that's important for you to know. Also, in case the New York case eventually gets access to the president's finances, it's in a grand jury, so it's supposed to be confidential. And so even if it moves in that direction, the public may not have access. So just want to give you a heads up about that. All right, I'm looking into a couple of really exciting stories, historical events that really have happened over the last historical events that we can mark over the next few days. So I'm going to be hard at work at that for this afternoon, but I'm curious what else you'd like to talk about and what else we can do for you. So always direct message us with your requests, or you can email us at hello@smarternews.com. But those are the big two news items of the day. What's going to happen with schools, not just for parents, but all of America because of the structure. A creative question for you on that. We're marking a birth date in history for the sewing machine. And some really important decisions from the Supreme Court that don't have immediate consequences that directly impact your life, but you should definitely know about. All right, guys, have a great day, and I'll talk to you later.